Because I don't have a good question either. Y'all bow your heads with me. Let's open in a word of prayer this evening. Father God, we are so thankful to be able to gather here in this wonderful nation, in this beautiful state, in this grand time of year where joy hangs heavy in the air. God, we are so thankful to be able to come here and to open up your word, to fellowship together and to learn. We ask, God, that you would be with us this evening, be with the teaching of your word. Let it take root within us and flourish. Change us into the Christians that you would have us to be. Sanctify us, God, and help us to go out into this world and spread the gospel and glorify your name. In your name we pray. Amen. All right. Joshua, chapter 8 this evening. Do y'all remember about where we are? Not a whole bunch has happened. I say not a whole bunch. A little bit's happened. They've crossed over Canaan or the Jordan into the land of Canaan. They attacked Jericho, took Jericho pretty easily through the hand of God. Then they attacked Ai. That didn't go so well. They thought it was going to go well. Should have been a pushover. Didn't go well because Achan had taken spoils from Jericho, and he shouldn't have, and he hid them in his tent, buried them under the ground in his tent, and then that didn't end well for him. Then whenever they lost 36 men in the battle of Ai, Joshua fell on his face, started praying to God. God said, "Get up. You've the Israelites have been spoiled. You have taken these things that have been devoted for destruction from this city that was devoted to destruction. And I'm not going to be with y'all until you straighten yourselves out and get this stuff out from among you." So that's what they did. They went down by tribe to household to family to man, and then came upon Achan and eventually stoned him and his whole family and all of his possessions, and all of it was burned in a nearby valley. And then they were right with God. And now we pick up in chapter 8, following hot on the heels of that little episode. Chapter 8, verses 1 and 2. "And the Lord said unto Joshua, Fear not, neither be thou dismayed. Take all the people of war with thee, and arise, go up to Ai. See, I have given into thy hand the king of Ai, and his people, and his city, and his land. And thou shalt do to Ai and her king, as thou didst unto Jericho and her king. Only the spoil thereof, and the cattle thereof, shall ye take for a prey unto yourselves. Lay thee in ambush for the city behind it." The people have been restored now. They have found the sin in their midst and eliminated it. They have done their best to enter back into that covenantal relationship with God, to get on the right path. The sin's been wiped out from among them. So in that setting now, God once again is assuring them, just like he did back in chapter 1, verse 9. He says, "Have not I commanded thee? Be strong and of a good courage. Be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed, for the Lord thy God is with thee whithersoever thou goest." It's a lot of the same words, and now he's returning back to them 7 chapters later after they've gone through these ordeals. They've strayed and come back. So the lesson's been learned, judgment has been handed out, and God, in his good grace, seems eager to move forward, to leave this episode in the past and continue on with blessing his children in the promised land. He tells Joshua, take all the people of war. Go back to Ai, because he's given them the king, the people, the city, and the land. Now, why all the people of war? That's going to be the obvious question here. Because Jericho was a tremendous city. There was a giant city with massive walls. Ai is a fraction of that size. And even the Israelite spies that Joshua sent out could see that it was a small target. That's why they only recommended a few thousand. You remember that in the very first attack. They said, don't send everybody. You can rest some of these people. Let's take a few thousand. Let's take 2,000 or 3,000. We'll go take Ai, because the city of Ai, as we see here in a little bit, is 12,000 people. All together, that's everybody, 12,000. So on average, you're looking about 6,000 of those being women. And of the 6,000 that are men, they aren't all fighting age. So we're really talking 4,000 people in the city of Ai that can even put up a fight. But here, even with those numbers, even with the deck so stacked, God says, take all the fighting men, take all the people of war, and go back to Ai. Now, it has to be because of how Joshua describes the people in the aftermath of the first attack with Ai, the first little skirmish with Ai. In chapter 7, verse 5, it says, And the men of Ai smote of them about 36 men, for they chased them from before the gate even unto Shebarim, and smote them in the going down. Wherefore the hearts of the people melted and became as water. What should have been an absolute pushover for these people who knew that God had their backs, going into Ai with a fraction of the men that it took to take Jericho, when Jericho wasn't even through their own military might. They said, don't worry about it, we'll rest some people up and take a smaller force here. Should have been an absolute blowout. But the people of Ai turned them away and were killing them as they were running down in the fields. So they've suffered a national defeat from what it should have been an absolute pushover, and now they have a shared morale problem. Think of, and I'm not huge on sports analogies because when you get down into the weeds of it, I don't know enough about any one sport to really get into the ins and outs of a lot of the rules. But from a bird's eye view, think of a football team that's just absolutely amazing. Right now, that might be the Chiefs or the Detroit Lions, or if you're a college person, that might be Alabama, or who's really good in college football right now? Notre Dame, the Longhorns? All right, whichever. Imagine that team beating their rival, who's supposed to be a really good team, and that team has like a solid defensive line, just an impenetrable wall on the line of scrimmage, and they just completely stomp them for the whole world to see, not even a contest. And then the next week, that team goes to like a community college, and they don't even send their second or third string. They tell you, stay home. We're just going to send a few people. We'll send a handful over here, some of the starters there. It's going to be an absolute pushover. Don't worry about it. And the only problem is that after that last victory, a bunch of their team went out and cut up all over town, partied a little too hard, committed a few felonies, never quite sobered up from that party, and the team they send over there ends up getting just shut out, injured, beat up, turned over, disgraced by a bunch of community college nobodies. A number of them are even out for the season. Now, you know how that team would feel? Their hearts would be melted and as water, easily swayed. No firm footing, no confidence. They need a W. They've taken a good hit to their confidence and their morale. Now when they get back on track, when they apologize, they get in the good graces of the coach. The coach figures out who the ringleader was, and that person gets expelled from the team, and the coach is sending the whole team back now to this community college to stomp them flat, and everybody is going to participate. He's sending everybody on there, down to the third, fourth string, the deep roster they have. They need a morale boost. They need this W. Everybody's going to be a part of it, and he's making sure that the mascot and the water boy and the athletic trainer and all the booster club, everybody that he can send down to this community college is going to be at this next game. That's kind of what we're seeing here. They got whooped by what should have been an absolute pushover because they did something wrong. Now, with their hearts like water, God is saying, every one of you, all the fighting men are going to go right back to Ai. All the fighting men, even though there's only 12,000 people in the whole of the city of Ai, he's saying everybody's going to go back there, all the people of war, and he's going to give them the king, the people, the city, the land. And instead of a miracle of God, they are going to have an active part in bringing about the victory that they see at Ai. Now, it's by the plan of God through a strategic ambush, but they barely even fought at Jericho. After the walls fell, they just went straight in and put the city to the sword. There was some fighting, sure, in the city, but for the most part, it's not what you would see in an open field battle here. Then on top of that, in Jericho, it was a city devoted to destruction. You don't take anything. We're going to destroy it all. Here, God says, you may have of the spoils. Every bit of this is geared towards revving these people up, restoring them, bringing back their confidence, showing them that God has their back. He said, I'm going to send all of you to topple this tiny little 12,000 person town, and you can have whatever you can find in the town. Any bit of the spoil, that's for yours. Jericho was solemnly devoted to destruction by God, but it's not so with this city. It's to be destroyed, but it's not classified in the same way that Jericho was. So the Israelites can take the silver, they can take the gold, they can take the cattle, whatever material spoils they can find within the city here. Every aspect of this specific conquest, now that the people have returned to communion with God, seems to be meant to motivate them, to increase their morale, to bring them confidence in the rest of the campaign and the fact that God is with them here. Verses 3 through 8. So Joshua arose, and all the people of war to go up against Ai. And Joshua chose out 30,000 mighty men of valor, and sent them away by night. And he commanded them, saying, Behold, ye shall lie in wait against the city, even behind the city. Go not very far from the city, but be ye all ready. And I and all the people that are with me will approach unto the city, and it shall come to pass, when they come out against us, as at the first, that we will flee from before them. For they will come out after us, till we have drawn them from the city. For they will say, They flee before us, as at the first. Therefore we will flee before them. Then ye shall rise up from the ambush, and seize upon the city. For the Lord your God will deliver it into your hand. And it shall be, when ye have taken the city, that ye shall set the city on fire, according to the commandment of the Lord shall ye do. See, I have commanded you. Joshua gets up the next day to enact the plan of God that's been given him. He chose out 30,000 fighting men, and he sent them out by night to lay in wait behind the city. In an ambush towards the western area of the city, there was a valley there, and it had to be a pretty good valley and a pretty good hiding spot, because it's hiding 30,000 people. This is a pretty good covert operation for him to break up the camp and send 30,000 people by secret off to the west of the city of Ai, but it happened. Now, some people think there's a discrepancy between verse 3, where it calls out 30,000 people, and what we're about to read in verse 12, because it talks about Joshua takes 5,000 men and sets them in ambush as well. We aren't given a play-by-play of how Joshua deployed these men or how many he took with him specifically. Maybe while 30,000 were selected for the ambush, 5,000 were, actually deployed when the decisive moment came. Maybe Joshua had two distinct bodies of men, 30,000 in ambush here, 5,000 in ambush, in a slightly different location with them, or 5,000 of the 30,000. Or on the day after the 30,000 had taken up their position, 5,000 might have been sent from Joshua's own force to join them. It's not contradictory, it's just we have a number there. But at no point does it say 30,000 and only 30,000 and not a man more. We just get two numbers here, so don't get caught up with something like that. What's happening here is this. Joshua is going to approach the city of Ai head on with a decent-sized force, enough to get the attention of the people within the city. He's going to approach it from the north. When the people of Ai come out, they're going to turn and run just like the 3,000 did in the previous chapters here. So as soon, whatever force Joshua has, as soon as they see people come out from the city of Ai, they're going to act cowardly, turn right around and run from them toward the wilderness. And the people of Ai are going to see it, and they're going to go, these Israelites are purebred cowards. We're going to chase them down just like we did before. Everybody get out, empty out the city. We're going after all these people. This is another easy fight, another easy victory for us. This time, though, when they give chase, Joshua has hidden this giant group of men off to the side that after the city empties out are going to rush into the empty city, set fire to a part of it, a big fire, because it's supposed to be noticeable, kill anybody that's in there, and then they'll come out of the city, and then Joshua and his men will turn around, and they'll have the people of Ai, all of them, trapped between a rock and a hard place right there. Verses 9 through 14. Joshua therefore sent them forth, and they went to lie in ambush and abode between Bethel and Ai on the west side of Ai. But Joshua lodged that night among the people. And Joshua rose up early in the morning and numbered the people and went up, he and the elders of Israel, before the people to Ai. And all the people, even the people of war that were with him, went up and drew nigh and came before the city and pitched on the north side of Ai. Now there was a valley between them and Ai. And he took about 5,000 men and set them to lie in ambush between Bethel and Ai on the west side of the city. And when they had set the people, even all the host that was on the north of the city and their liers in wait on the west of the city, Joshua went that night into the midst of the valley. And it came to pass when the king of Ai saw it that they hasted and rose up early. And the men of the city went out against Israel to battle, he and all his people at a time appointed before the plain. But he wist not that there were liers in ambush against him behind the city. The plan was executed exactly as it had been told. Joshua and his host approached Ai from the north. They selected a group of soldiers to lie in ambush to the west between Bethel, which Bethel is only really 1.5 miles to 2 miles away from Ai. So that wasn't very far, especially when you're hiding 30,000 people within that. So it's a miracle in itself that Bethel didn't completely ruin this plan. But we see as well that Bethel is mentioned as having turned out. When the king of Ai saw that a group of Israelites had amassed themselves just north of the city, he got excited. It says he hasted. When the king of Ai saw it, that he hasted and rose up early, and the men of the city went out against Israel to battle. And why wouldn't he? I mean, he'd be excited here because the first battle went so well that, they heard tales of the Israelites, the God of the Israelites, how the mighty hand of their God went before them, parted the Red Sea, the plagues in Egypt. We see all through the Old Testament God telling Moses how he's going to send his terror upon the people of Canaan. All of these rumors that have been hitting the king of Ai about what terrors face them, and whenever they do finally face the Israelites, they turned and ran, and they killed 36 of them, stabbing them in the back as they were running through the field here. So when he sees another group of Israelites, he's excited about it. He said, here's another easy victory for us, another one to chalk up in the win column for us. He had already beaten them soundly once, and Jericho even was no match for them, but he, of all the people of Canaan, has already seen military victory against them once. He's thinking he was going to be the one in all of Canaan with his tiny little town to turn the Israelites away, this invading army that had come into the land of Canaan that they had heard so many rumors about. He said, he's thinking, man, I'm excited because we're going to fight them again. We've already beaten them once. Maybe I am the king that's going to get such renown for having turned away this invading force that we've been hearing about for so long. So he saw the army gathered against him. He hasted, rose up early with the men of the city, went out with all of his people against Israel to battle, unaware, again, of the army that was lying in wait to the west. Verses 15 through 17. And Joshua and all Israel made as if they were beaten before them and fled by the way of the wilderness. And all the people that were in Ai were called together to pursue after them, and they pursued after Joshua and were drawn away from the city. And there was not a man left in Ai or Bethel that went not out after Israel, and they left the city open and pursued after Israel. So the trap is sprung. Joshua and his troops feigned retreat in the face of the enemy. They head for the wilderness. And then verse 17 says, there's not a man left in Ai or Bethel at this time. So apparently it wasn't just Ai, it was Bethel, again, about 1.5 miles to 2 miles away. It also emptied out to pursue the Israelites. Now, the logistics of how that actually worked, how they knew about them but then didn't know about the 30,000 lying in wait, if they had planned, there's some kind, because it is only a mile and a half away. That's not beyond the ability of a signal fire or something like that. If they somehow maybe communicated to Bethel that the Israelites were here, you can come out and help us. We'll share in the victory. We just need to guarantee that we turn these guys away because we are the doorstep of the land of Canaan. We don't know, but it seems that Ai had put them on alert or was somehow communicating with them during the short skirmish between the troops in the north. So Joshua's ambushed troops to the west had to be pretty well hidden in the valley where they'd been secreted away for 2 cities to be completely unaware of them. Now, it's curious. We don't hear about the capture of Bethel at this time, even though it would have been perfectly easy to take it because the city's left empty, just like Ai has been left empty. They sent out all of their men along with all of the men of Ai, and they all died within this skirmish here. Now, the king of Bethel is named, there's a list in Joshua chapter 12. The king of Bethel is named in this list of the kings that Joshua smote, the ones that he killed. And we read of the capture of Bethel in Judges chapter 1, but for whatever reason, we don't see it within the book of Joshua. God, for whatever reason, decided that it wasn't time for the Israelites to take the city of Bethel. Even though it was empty, this is all focused on Ai right here. So God saw fit, apparently, that the Israelites take cities one target at a time. Maybe he didn't want them spread too thin or something like that. We don't know. It's all conjecture. Verses 18 through 22. And the Lord said unto Joshua, stretch out the spear that is in thine hand toward Ai, for I will give it into thine hand. And Joshua stretched out the spear that he had in his hand toward the city. And the ambush arose quickly out of their place, and they ran as soon as he had stretched out his hand, and they entered into the city and took it, and hasted, and set the city on fire. And when the men of Ai looked behind them, they saw, and behold, the smoke of the city ascended up to heaven, and they had no power to flee this way or that way, and the people fled to the wilderness, turned back upon their pursuers. And when Joshua and all Israel saw that the ambush had taken the city, and that the smoke of the city ascended, then they turned again and slew the men of Ai. And the other issued out of the city against them, so that they were in the midst of Israel, some on this side and some on that side, and they smote them, so that they let none of them remain or escape. Moses and Aaron had staves. Joshua has a spear. A light javelins, probably had a flag or a streamer attached to it, something like that. Not a heavy spear like Goliath carried or like King Saul is noted as often throwing around, but something more easily handled that could be outstretched for a period of time, according to this. Joshua stretched out the spear in his hand and pointed it toward the city, and that was the signal to send the soldiers that were lying in wait out of their hiding place into the city and to take over the city so they could come back out. They quickly pop out of their hiding places. They ran into the undefended city of Ai. They started a great fire in the city, a fire big enough that it's going to catch the attention of even men who are in the heat of battle, which would have to be a pretty good fire. But at the same time, not too big. They're not burning the city down because they get spoils out of this city. They can take anything they can carry away. So you don't want to burn the whole thing down. So maybe they're piling up a bunch of hay carts or something like that in the middle of the city. What they want is enough of a signal fire to tell everybody outside the city's been taken. But they're not trying to burn down all the buildings around them because they don't want to burn the robes and the tapestries and the gold and whatever trappings they can find in there. When the men of Ai saw the smoke and stopped fighting and stopped chasing Joshua, Joshua turned on them. He attacked them from one end. The surprise forces attacked them coming out of the city, and they were completely encompassed. They had nowhere that they could possibly run. Verses 23 through 29. And the king of Ai they took alive and brought him to Joshua. And it came to pass, when Israel had made an end of slaying all the inhabitants of Ai in the field in the wilderness wherein they chased them, And when they were all fallen on the edge of the sword until they were consumed, that all the Israelites returned unto Ai and smote it with the edge of the sword. And so it was that all that fell that day, both of men and women, were 12,000, even all the men of Ai. For Joshua drew not his hand back, wherewith he stretched out the spear, until he had utterly destroyed all the inhabitants of Ai. Only the cattle and the spoil of that city Israel took for a prey unto themselves, according unto the word of the Lord which he commanded Joshua. And Joshua burnt Ai and made it an heap forever, even a desolation unto this day. And the king of Ai he hanged on a tree until eventide. And as soon as the sun was down, Joshua commanded that they should take his carcass down from the tree and cast it at the entering of the gate of the city, and raise thereon a great heap of stones that remaineth unto this day. So the people of Ai didn't stand a chance. They thought they could win because Israel was a bunch of cowards, but they overexposed themselves. The ambush force alone was 30,000 against no more than 12,000 people in all of Ai. Verse 26 says that Joshua did not draw back his hand with the spear until he had utterly destroyed all the inhabitants of Ai. Some people take that to be figurative language, that he fought spear in hand until the battle was completely won. Some people take that to be a little more literal. Just like with Moses, when he maintained the same posture of holding his staff in the air, and anytime he would let it down, the battle would swing towards the enemy, and whenever he would raise it back up, the Israelites would start winning again. It came down to they had people holding his arm up, helping him, because the muscles in his shoulder were just gone, but God said, hold up your staff, and the people would see it, and he would win. So, we don't really know. One way or another, Joshua fought. He had a spear. Either he was holding it up the whole time or he was using it. He was whacking people with it. We're not specifically told, but it's a small matter. They won. The important part is that victory was had, and the spoils of that victory were taken, and the city was burned to the ground, and then the king was taken for a public execution. Now, not for shame, really, but for justice. It is a shameful thing to be hung on a tree as he was, but what they were really wanting was the execution, God's justice on these people here. It's shameful to have led a kingdom in paganism and idolatry, but Joshua wasn't looking to be petty. God had devoted the land of Canaan to execution. He'd given these people over. It was their time, as it's been described earlier in the Old Testament. The time for their judgment had come to fruition, or something. I can't remember the exact words of it. Yes, sir.
In the New Testament, they use the same verbiage when it says Jesus was hanged on a tree. So they didn't have execution like the Romans did when they hung Jesus, or are they talking about just hanging like on the neck?
More than likely, he was killed separately and then displayed. Now, and the word for hanging on a tree, as they're using it, it could be crucifixion. He could be like nailed out on it. He could be hanging by the neck. He could even be impaled. He could have been up on a tree like that. Deuteronomy 21 verses 22 through 23 says, "And if a man have committed a sin worthy of death, and he be put to death, and thou hang him on a tree, his body shall not remain all night upon the tree, but thou shalt in any wise bury him that day, for he that is hanged is accursed of God, that thy land be not defiled, which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance." So in Deuteronomy, when we see it laid out within God's law, they separate the two actions. We don't think he was hung by the neck until dead and then left there. It doesn't say that's not how it happened, but he was killed. Yes, ma'am.
When Saul and his sons were killed in battle, didn't they hang them or nail them to
The sons were hung outside that city, if I remember. It was not. I don't think it was Saul at that time. I think it was his sons first. And I may be incorrect about that, the timeline. But you're right. They were hung. And then David heard about it, and he sent people to go cut them down because they weren't following the law of God. They were on display for as long as people were going to let them stay up there. But
So when I read that, that's what came to my mind was Saul and Jonathan, and whether it was Saul or just his sons, but they stuck them to the wall somehow with spears or something, and I just figured that was the same thing. Same kind of thing here, but I don't know.
I'd have to look at it. I can't tell you yes or no, honestly. I know they were put on display. I can't remember if it was on a tree or on the city walls. Saul killed himself, more or less.
Yeah.
But the sons were killed in battle and taken and put on display like that, as like a shameful act. But again, they were left up there. Regardless of being on a tree or not, they're supposed to be brought down from that because it would defile the land to do something, as it says there, that thy land be not defiled, which the Lord give thee for an inheritance here. So in accordance with the law of Moses, the king was killed and then hung either on a cross by a rope or impaled on a stake, however, and he remained there until it was dark. But then his body was taken and buried. It was thrown at the gates of the city, buried under a giant heap of stones that at the time of writing this, the stones were still heaped up there. So every time something good or bad happens to the people of Israel, we see a giant heap of stones from it. Verses 30 through 35. Then Joshua built an altar unto the Lord God of Israel in Mount Ebal, as Moses the servant of the Lord commanded the children of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of whole stones, over which no man hath lift up any iron, and they offered thereon burnt offerings unto the Lord, and sacrificed peace offerings. And he wrote there upon the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he wrote in the presence of the children of Israel. And all Israel and their elders and officers and their judges stood on this side the ark and on that side before the priests, the Levites, which bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, as well the stranger as he that was born among them, half of them over against Mount Gerizim and half of them over against Mount Ebal, as Moses the servant of the Lord had commanded before, that they should bless the people of Israel. And afterward he read all the words of the law, the blessings and cursings, according to all that is written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses commanded which Joshua read not before all the congregation of Israel, with the women and the little ones and the strangers that were conversing among them. Having secured peace for a time, with these two victories here, having secured a foothold, they don't have any enemies immediately on their doorstep. They've taken Jericho. They've taken Ai. They didn't take Bethel. That's the next closest town, but it's empty. It's not a threat. So they've got a short time of peace here where they don't have to worry about anybody coming after them. So having secured that little time of peace, Joshua takes advantage of that time, and he observes the commands given by Moses to ratify and solidify the laws of God in this new land. This is probably even the first opportunity he has to obey that law that was given, because prior to this, the area of the altars were under enemy control, where he was explicitly told in Deuteronomy, the blessing was to be put on Mount Gerizim and the altar and the curse on Mount Ebal. Do y'all remember that? We talked about how they were going to, there was a valley of the two mountains that would come down here, and not giant mountains and not some huge valley, but within yelling distance, because supposedly they were going to be able to stand in the middle of them and read aloud the words of the law, and both parties would be able to hear it. And one mountain was going to contain a record of blessings that God gave, and one mountain was going to contain a record of the cursings that God gave there. Deuteronomy 27, verse 2, it says, "So it shall be on the day when you cross the Jordan to the land which the Lord your God gives you, that you shall set up for yourself large stones and coat them with lime, and write on them all the words of this law when you cross over, so that you may enter the land which the Lord your God gives you, a land flowing with milk and honey, as the Lord the God of your fathers promised you. So it shall be when you cross the Jordan, you shall set up on Mount Ebal the stones, as I am commanding you today, and you shall coat them with lime. Moreover, you shall build there an altar to the Lord your God, an altar of stones. You shall not wield an iron tool on them. You shall build the altar of the Lord your God of uncut stones, and you shall offer on it burnt offerings to the Lord your God, and you shall sacrifice peace offerings and eat there and rejoice before the Lord your God. You shall write on the stones all the words of this law very distinctly. That's what Joshua did on brand new polished stones, not stones that had been touched by any iron tool. Y'all remember talking about that when we talked about the tabernacle? They said when you create an altar of stone, you do it with stones that naturally fit together within an altar shape. You don't do it on anything that has been carved, that has been fashioned, that has been refined by the hand of man. This is something to God. And what they were doing was stop me, because nobody at that time would argue against maybe it'd be a little nicer if we had maybe a little flatter surface right here for the sacrifices. Why don't we just try and chisel that away? Nobody's going to argue against that. And then maybe it goes from that to, why don't we just even off this part and this part here, make a little flat right there. And then maybe we inlay this part with gold, because this is an altar for God, right? Nobody's going to argue against that until you feel like you're walking into one of these Orthodox churches where, everything is gold-plated and iconography absolutely everywhere. It's a slippery slope. They were cutting that off from the very beginning. He said, when you make an altar to God, it is of God. You don't have a single hand in this. Stack the stones together in a rough formation as God directs you. That's your altar. You don't need to touch with it. You don't need to mess with it. You aren't going to improve upon what God has paid for you here. That's what they're talking about here. As soon as they had the opportunity, it says the day that you cross over the Jordan. It's not, the word day there isn't like specifically the 24-hour period where you cross over the river Jordan. It's saying at that time, that general time when you've crossed over, as soon as you have the opportunity, make sure that you lay the foundation of this new civilization, that this new settlement in the laws of God. You start from square one in the laws of God. And as soon as they had the opportunity here, that they crossed over the Jordan, they took Jericho, they've carved themselves out a little foothold here where they can set up camp and rest for a little bit. Before they take their rest, they set up the altars to God, and they record the blessings and the curses on the two mountains just as God had commanded them to do. The word of God was transcribed, and it was read for all the people. And if any lesson is to be taken from this section, it is when God gives you peace, when God gives you a downtime like this, prepare yourself. Prepare for that war that will inevitably come in your life. Prepare for the hard times. Solidify yourself in His Word and in His laws. Make your footing firm so that when temptation, trial, hardships, when any of those rear their head, you have the rock of God to lean on. You have that solid foundation in your life here. You are never more at risk from temptation and the devil than when you feel comfortable, when you let your guard down, when you might be tempted to just coast for a little bit here. So we see these people, as soon as they have the ability to take a breath, they're not taking a breath and then setting God aside. They're taking a breath and going, you know what, let's focus on our foundation and preparing ourselves for what God seems to have for us in this land, not knowing what that might be. Joshua saw victory, and instead of sitting on his hands, he acted on it. He sought direction from God's word. He obeyed it. He didn't wait, and that was the first opportunity given to obey this commandment, and he took it. He didn't wait for anything, didn't need any extra clearance on it. He said, all right, God, I'm going to do it. Now, chapter 9, I didn't flesh out completely through. We can go through what I've got, but we don't have enough time to go through every bit of it anyway. But it's an interesting story, and probably not one that you're completely alien to you here, so we'll go through chapter 9 a little bit here. Chapter 9, first two verses. And it came to pass, when all the kings which were on this side Jordan, in the hills and in the valleys, and in all the coasts of the great sea over against Lebanon, the Hittite and the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite, heard thereof, that they gathered themselves together to fight with Joshua and with Israel with one accord. After Jericho had been taken, after Ai had been taken, after Bethel had been emptied out, and all of them soundly beaten with no real casualties. 36 people dead, yes, and that's a shame, but 36 out of 2 million, you can say practically there's no casualties. The people of Canaan hear what's going on, and they decide to band together against Joshua and the Israelites. Now, a fractured enemy, as we have already seen, is a formidable adversary. Even 3,000 people in Ai were able to turn away a force from the Israelites here, and that was just them standing on their own. But now they're banding together. They're combining their strength to oppose the hand of God. All of these people listed here, but not the Gibeonites. They have a bit more wiliness about them here. So let's read, and this is a long passage, but I couldn't find any way to break it up. Verses 3 through 16. And when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done unto Jericho and to Ai, they did work wilily and went and made as if they had been ambassadors, and took old sacks upon their asses, and wine bottles, old and rent and bound up, and old shoes, and clouded upon their feet, and old garments upon them, and all the bread of their provision was dry and moldy. And they went to Joshua unto the camp at Gilgal, and said unto him and to the men of Israel, We be come from a far country. Now therefore make ye a league with us. And the men of Israel said unto the Hivites, Peradventure ye dwell among us, and how shall we make a league with you? And they said unto Joshua, We are thy servants. And Joshua said unto them, Who are ye, and from whence come ye? And they said unto him, From a very far country thy servants are come, because of the name of the Lord thy God. For we have heard the fame of him, and all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the 2 kings of the Amorites that were beyond Jordan, to Sihon king of Heshbon, and to Og king of Bashan, which was at Ashtaroth. Wherefore our elders and all the inhabitants of our country spake to us, saying, Take victuals with you for your journey, and go to meet them, and say unto them, We are your servants, therefore now make ye a league with us. This our bread we took hot for our provision out of our houses on the day we came forth to go unto you, but now, behold, it is dry, and it is moldy. And these bottles of wine which we filled were new, and behold, they be rent, and these our garments and our shoes are become old by reason of the very long journey. And the men took of their victuals, and asked not counsel at the mouth of the Lord. And Joshua made peace with them, and made a league with them, to let them live, and the princes of the congregation swear unto them. And it came to pass at the end of 3 days, after they had made a league with them, that they heard that they were their neighbors, and that they dwelt among them. So while the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites were all banding together to try and beat Israel through brute strength, the Gibeonites had a different idea. If you can't beat them, join them. So they got old sacks, old patched up wine bottles, old shoes, tore up hand-me-down clothes, and a bunch of moldy bread. Why they had a bunch of moldy bread laying around, I don't know. They had a whole bunch of moldy bread. And they went to the Israelite camp at Gilgal, and they acted as if they were ambassadors from a far, far away land, and they had been on a long, long journey, and they traveled miles and miles just to be able to offer themselves in service to the people of the one true God, because they had heard even from a far, far away land how great the God of Israel is. They said, Accept us, treaty with us, make an agreement between our people, and we will serve you. And the Israelites, they're naive, but they're not completely naive. They call out in verse 7, they say, Peradventure ye dwell among us, how shall we make a league with you? What that's saying is, what if y'all aren't what you say you are and you're actually locals? And they more or less told him, if you're Canaanites, we can't make a league with you. We're forbidden. This is our land. You thought it was your land. It's our land now. God's given it to us. We are to conquer this land and this people here. Sorry, not sorry. This is where we're at right now. And they said, Oh, look, can't you see how beat up and tired and wore out we are? Can't you see our patched shoes and our old wine skins? Look at this bread. Look at this moldy bread. It kills me too. They're like, we took this bread hot out of the oven, and put it in this sack the day we left, but look how old and dried up and moldy it is now. I remember when it was hot, and now it's just so old. We're not from around here. So it sounds like they're saying like those other Canaanites are real jerks. And we sure are glad we don't belong to them. We're from so far away. You've probably never even heard of the land where we're from, but just go ahead and let us join you. But remember, what they're trying to do here is strictly forbidden in the law of God numerous times. Exodus 23 says, "And I will establish your borders from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines and from the desert to the Euphrates. For I will deliver the inhabitants into your hand, and you will drive them out before you. You shall make no covenant with them or with their gods. They must not remain in your land, lest they cause you to sin against me. For if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare to you." Exodus 34, "Observe what I command you this day. I will drive out before you the Amorites, Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites." That's all the same people. "Be careful not to make a treaty with the inhabitants of the land you are entering, lest they become a snare in your midst." Deuteronomy chapter 7, "When the Lord your God brings you into the land that you are entering to possess, and he drives out before you many nations, the Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, 7 nations larger and stronger than you, and when the Lord your God has delivered them over to you to defeat them, then you must devote them to complete destruction. Make no treaty with them. Show them no mercy. Do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons." So if the Israelites don't exercise some discernment here, they are in trouble of once again sinning against God. And they just got back on track from the whole Achan thing. They just got back into God's good graces after defiling themselves with the spoil of a city that had been devoted to divine destruction. Now, we read this and we understand what's going on, and we have no problem looking at the situation saying, yes, that would be a sin against God for the Israelites to enter into some kind of peaceful association with the Gibeonites. But don't miss the greater implication of something like that. This tells us by implication that it's possible to sin against God through a lack of due diligence, through a lack of effort in trying to figure out what God would really have in a situation. It's possible to sin against God just from your complacency.
Verse 14 here, I think, is kind of the worst. "And the men took of their victuals and asked not counsel at the mouth of the Lord."
So when it says it took of their victuals, what it's saying is that they took visual stock of what they were seeing here. They looked everything over and they said, all right, your story checks out. And then they made the decision to enter into the treaty with them, to make the league with them there. And again, we look at this from the bird's eye view. We go, oh no, they're doing wrong there, but be careful. Because that does mean there's a sub-law, a sub-truth going in there in between the lines. This means that in our own lives, when we come across situations, it's possible for us to sin against God. And it's not a sin of commission. It's not even a sin of omission directly. It's a sin of you not taking the time to truly figure out the situation, the morality of the situation that's being presented to you, but taking it at face value when you have the tools to do a better job. Because they end up they end up on the wrong side of God's law, on the wrong side of God's will in this situation there, and that they could have prevented it, but they didn't. Now, was it from pure wickedness? No. Was it from intent? No. I think they just got back to God's graces, and they called it out a little bit. They were looking things over, but they stopped halfway. If they would have taken a closer look, if they would have tried, truly to discern what was going on, and discernment, especially in these times, is something that we should all really seek to foster in our lives. Yes, sir?
But yet they spoke the same language.
Yeah, I know. I don't know if there was, I don't know if any common tongue mentioned within the Bible or something like that. Because I think that question's come up before too. Because, I mean, Babel flat out confused everything, but that was pre-flood.
I think there were like interpreters, maybe.
I don't know, maybe. I don't
Far
know.
away too might have meant 30 miles. It's not, we think of far away, we think of Europe or, far away wasn't that far away then. You know, that's, far away could have been a short distance to where we think of.
That's, the problem is we have preservatives, so our bread doesn't mold that quickly.
That's
We just can't tell it anymore. That completely throws off all geography. That's it. That's all I had prepared for this evening, but I think that's an interesting thought to end on as well. Obviously, there's no Bible study next week. There won't be any Bible study the week after that. We're going to be back here January 8th. So y'all get Christmas and you get New Year's Day off, and then we'll pop right back into the book of Joshua and keep going.